Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and on this episode we're walking in Memphis. The topic of this episode is going to be a little bit of a different one. Normally we've reviewed CWA shows from the late 70s all the way through the 80s. At the end of the 80s, CWA morphed and turned into the USWA. So I've decided that we're going to switch up every other week. One week we're going to do USWA, the next week we're going to do CWA videos. That way it gives a little bit more variety, a little bit different, so you can see the differences, what was happening in the 90s, what was happening in the 80s. For this one, we have a USWA show from June 26, 1993. With all that being said, if you haven't seen any of my shows before, we grade everything on a 1 to 5 scale. 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. We start off the show with Jeff Jarrett doing an interview at the desk with Dave Brown. We see a fan come out of the crowd, request autographs from both Jarrett and Dave Brown, which they both obliged to. Kind of sets up a gimmick that'll go on through most of the show. Pretty decent segment. And if you haven't seen my videos before, we rate everything per segment on these Memphis shows because they squeeze so much into the segments. And by segment, I mean usually from commercial to commercial unless something bleeds over into the next segment. Coming from that, we get a match with Chris Frazier going up against Scott Taylor, who would later go on to be Scotty 2 Hotty. This was a decent match. Not much to write home for. At the end, Scotty 2 Hotty or Scott Taylor fails to be what looks like he was going for a top rope DDT where he jumped off and then DDT'd the guy. He botched it pretty badly. He does pick up the win. Scott Taylor wins. For that, I'm going to give this a 2. The botch at the end really tanked the match, and the match wasn't great to begin with. I've seen a lot better from Scott Taylor, both as Scott Taylor and Scotty 2 Hotty. So, again, this just a bit of a botch brought it down for me. Next up, coming to the next segment, we get an interview with Miss Simpson and Brian Christopher, which is funny seeing Brian Christopher and Scott Taylor back to back because they would go on to become Too Much and then Too Cool much later on in WWE. Pretty cool seeing these two back-to-back, knowing where they would go in the future. Coming from that, we get another solo interview with Brian Christopher after a commercial. Then the fan comes up to him, gets his autograph as well. We see a video of Tony Falk getting his head shaved, which then leads us into a match with Brian Christopher versus Nightmare Danny Davis. During the match, that fan that's been gathering the autographs is sitting in the crowd. Jeff Jarrett comes up and gets the autograph book from him, which distracts Christopher. Christopher gets counted out. Danny Davis picks up the win on it. For all of that segment, I'm going to give that all a 4. It was all pretty good stuff. I really enjoyed it. I especially liked the ongoing story, and we're going to get more on that even later, about the fan and the autograph. After that, we get Jeff Jarrett comes out for another interview. He says what happened is before he had signed away that the match that he's going to have with Christopher for the title, for the USWA Championship, he's putting his hair on the line that Brian Christopher tricked him into that. But what Brian Christopher just signed, he tricked him into letting Jeff Jarrett pick the special guest referee, which he picks Jackie Fargo. And then we go into a package of Jackie Fargo highlights. Pretty cool little thing they did here. I know they would bring Jackie Fargo back for special occasions just to get a boost in the ratings, get a boost in the ticket buys. Even at this point in his career, he was an absolute legend, so the crowd was wanting to see him. Going from that, our next segment has Brian Christopher coming back out to the announce table. He then attacks a fan, gets ran off by Jeff Jarrett and some of the security, or people supposed to be security. Which leads us into a video with with Owen Hart versus Papashango, where they're wrestling for the USWA Championship. I think Christopher had the North American title, and at this point, Papashango had the USWA, what would be the World Championship. Owen picks up the win on the video. We go back to the announce table where we have Burt Prentice doing an interview where basically he turned on Papashango to join up with Owen Hart. For all that, the reveal of Jackie Fargo, the 2 interviews, Christopher and Burt Prentice, the 2 videos, the Fargo video, the Owen and Papashango video, I'm giving that all a 5. Coming back off of that, after break, we get a video package of Owen Hart attacking Jerry the King Lawler. This was at the time where Jerry Lawler was in a feud with Bret Hart and WWF at the time over being who was the king. Bret Hart had just won the King of the Ring tournament. So it was kind of neat seeing in WWF or WWE as you know it now, where Lawler is the heel and Bret is the face. But in USWA, Bret and Owen were definitely the heels, with Jerry Lawler being the face. Kind of neat seeing this. Afterwards, Lawler comes out for an interview. Basically says, hey, when I go to WWF, they see me as a bad guy, but you all know I am a bad guy. He gets interviewed before and after the break, so we're going to put that all into one thing because it's a continuous thing. Talking about not only him, but he's also talking about Paul Neighbors, the referee that was involved in the match where Owen Hart got attacked. He said he's going to have a match later. I think he said Evansville, I might be wrong, with Paul Neighbors that Eddie Marlin set up. Just fantastic stuff. If you've seen any Jerry Lawler interview, you know he's one of the top 5 talkers in the history of wrestling. He's just fantastic at it. That's what made him such a good color commentator. After that, we go back, we come to a video of New Jack, yes, that New Jack, and Homeboy versus Rex King and Steve Dahl, which would later go on to become Well Done in WWE. This was just a little package for that, showing that the New Jack and Homeboy won the tag team championship. For all that, the Owen and Lawler stuff, the Lawler interviews, I'm giving that whole segment a 5. Now next up we get Miss Texas, who would later go on to be Jacqueline. She comes out talking about a mud match she's going to have with Miss Simpson, which brings out Burt Prentice, who's representing Miss Simpson. Burt Prentice is set up to be in a match with a wrestler named Lone Eagle, who is a little person, which is where I'm going to go into a disclaimer here. If you do end up watching this video, they do say some words that then were okay, but now are not. Specifically the M word, which I know I don't even know if little people's a proper terminology. I don't know what the proper terminology would be. If I'm offending you, I do apologize. But I know that there's a lot of people that the M word bothers, and if you don't know what that is, I'm not going to say it. It was a different time, and it was a different era where they were being booked as such, so take that with a grain of salt, but there is some things that now could be considered offensive that are said during this segment. It gets to the point where Miss Texas, Burt Prentice is going to dump Miss Texas into what looks like a trough that they have out there with some mud in it, which brings out Lone Eagle, who turns it around, attacks Burt Prentice. Then between Lone Eagle and Miss Texas, they get Burt Prentice into the mud. Next up, we get a video package with Danny Davis, Nightmare Danny Davis, and Paul Neighbors, the aforementioned referee, and how he's affected some of Danny Davis's matches. Kind of interesting that this is not the Danny Davis that was the evil referee in WWE, but it's a different Danny Davis involved in another evil referee gimmick. I thought that was interesting. Afterwards, we get an interview with Danny Davis. Then we close out the show with a very short Brian Christopher interview, and I think I know I missed something here. There was a New Jack and Homeboy did have a match in here that I forgot to put on my rundown. It was very short. I believe it was before the Davis and Neighbors interview. So they had a very short match. I forget who they were wrestling against. It was two lesser known talents. I'm gonna put it down here. You'll see. I'll put the notation of who they actually wrestled. For that whole segment, I'm going to give this all a 3 to end out the show. Overall, I'm going to give the show a 4. I thought it was entertaining. The story being interweaving between Christopher and Jarrett and tricking Christopher into signing over for the special referee, going all through the show. Christopher being on multiple segments, Danny Davis being on multiple segments. What I really enjoyed about Memphis is how they would weave in the storylines all the way through. So everybody seemed to have a storyline, everybody seemed to work together with their storylines. Just an interesting show, an interesting showcase. Again, I'm going to give the show altogether a 4. I thought it was rather good. And I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but if you want to watch the show that I reviewed for this, there's going to be a link to the YouTube video where I watch this, and it's the same exact video I watched, so it's not like we're watching different. But definitely check it out. Definitely some interesting things on there, because it is one that still has all the old commercials, some local Memphis commercials. A commercial for Crystal Pepsi debuting, if you remember Crystal Pepsi and what a flop that was. The Bigfoot Pizza Hut pizza, I don't know if anybody remembers that, but it was like a twice the size Sicilian pizza, which is a square pizza. Like, imagine if you took 2 Pizza Hut boxes and put them side by side, that was the size of the pizza. And it really stood out because it was $10.99 for that monstrosity. But yeah, it was just some nostalgia in there as well. All in all, another fantastic show. Like I said, I'm going to alternate back and forth between the USWA 90s stuff and the CWA late 70s, 80s stuff to kind of keep it fresh every week, give it a new, new faces, new wrestlers to be reviewed. A lot of the guys are going to carry over. Of course, Jerry Lawler's all the way through it. People like Jeff Jarrett are involved in a lot of it. So you are going to see some of the same people, but you're going to see the evolution or de-evolution of them in some cases. With all that being said, smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't, and if you made it all the way to the end, let's put a Brian Christopher or Too Sexy or Grandmaster Sexay, whatever you prefer to call him, let's put it in the comments, because I think he's highly underrated as a wrestler, and he's someone that doesn't get talked about a lot. I know, and I'm probably going to go off on a little bit of a rant here. He was a little bit small for his era, but he was just as good of a talker as anybody else. If we could have had Brian Christopher now, what they had in Brian Christopher in Memphis, you would have a top guy in either WWE or AEW. He was just that good. He was a fantastic wrestler all the way around. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and we've been walking in Memphis.